I'm Shawna Rosner, your host of In-House Counsel Chronicles. Today, my guest is Sarah Hamid. Sarah has spent the majority of her legal career working in-house and has worked at a variety of healthcare companies, including GE Healthcare. Currently, Sarah is Group Director and Senior Lead Counsel of Data and Tech Regulatory for Walmart. Welcome to the podcast, Sarah.
Thank you, Shawna. Great to be here, and thank you for the warm welcome. I'm looking forward to our chat this afternoon. I'll start by saying that obviously what I'm talking about today and the conversation is my personal opinions and absolutely not representing Walmart at all. So I want to be very clear about that.
Thanks for doing so. I'm so excited to get into our discussion today. I wanted to start by asking you about your path to becoming an in-house attorney. And I think you started your legal career a little bit overseas. So tell us a little bit about that.
I did. I went to law school in London, England, and did all my training over there. Worked for a very short time in a law firm, very fascinating commercial litigation with one very, very rich, super rich client, and all the work was related to that one client. It was pretty fascinating. Then moved over to North America and then sort of made my way through in terms of doing volunteer work, taking the bar exam, and then ended up working for a law firm in Memphis, Tennessee. But then quickly progressed in-house. I literally was at a firm for a year and came in-house pretty quickly. And since then, I've been working for global, highly regulated industries and companies in a variety sort of positions. But I've loved it. It's great.
So how did you develop a focus in technology, which I think most of your in-house experience has been in, correct?
That's correct. Well, it's mainly the industries that I've worked for and served with, and the companies have been very, very focused on technology. GE Healthcare is an example of that. It manufactures capital imaging equipment and both sells it and services it. And so in order to be the right advisor to that company, you've got to understand these products. You've got to understand the life cycle of the products. What is the problem that they're trying to resolve? Details about the product, the related health conditions, the market, the external constituents, and also understand it from a US and outside of the US perspective. So it's that constant learning and constant understanding that builds and the understanding towards technology, but not just technology, other aspects as well.
So with rapid changes in technology over the course of your career, how have you stayed informed and ahead of fast-moving legislation and regulation?
Yeah, I mean that's absolutely the greatest challenge. In this day and age, you are literally driving. It's like driving a car at 70 miles an hour and reading the signs as you go along. State privacy laws are a great example of that. There are about 20 or so on the books right now. And so understanding those regulations and then advising in real time businesses across the enterprise of the organization that you work with is absolutely a challenge. But it's also what makes it exciting. And for those that are intellectually curious, it's really, very, very stimulating. But what it means is you've got to continuously learn the external environment, the internal environment. What are the regulators saying? What are journalists saying? What are trade associations saying? And sort of bring all of that to the fore and interpret that and sort of match that with what are the priorities of the business that I'm working for and what it's trying to do, and how do I help this group navigate as a partner to get from A to Z. It may not be the way that is initially intended by the business, but let's find a way to navigate through so that we can honor the regulatory requirements and address those as well.
Okay, so Walmart's like the biggest retailer in the world, maybe, I'm thinking, or one of them. It's a global company. You work for some other global companies. How do companies like Walmart and other global companies manage regulatory compliance across so many different jurisdictions?
Yeah, that's a good question. You have to it's a combination, obviously, of things. In certain jurisdictions, you do have local people that you rely on for inputs. In other jurisdictions, you don't. So you have to have people either dedicated or as part of their role to be paying attention to what's going on in a market. Let's say it's a smaller market, and being tapping into the external voices as well, in whatever jurisdiction that is. Obviously, that's a constant theme. I've mentioned that in some of my prior responses. But again, matching what is happening internally in the business, what the business's priorities are, and then determining, okay, where do we need to focus and who do we need to tap into and get insights and information from. So again, it's that constant learning, constant conversations.
I can imagine it's a lot to manage. What legal or ethical considerations are top of mind when leveraging consumer data for personalization or AI?
Sure. Yeah, great. I think this is probably industry agnostic, but it's obviously things like consents. Well, first of all, what's the type of data that we're talking about?
Mm-hmm.
If it does involve any sort of link with a person, direct, right, indirect identifiers, then obviously consent comes into play. Do you need implicit consent? Do you need explicit consent? Those sort of that analysis, and then sort of playing within the framework of data minimization. Collect only what you need and not more than that. And then, of course, when it comes to AI, it's the transparency, explainability of what a company is doing with that data. Obviously, consumers and regulators are paying a lot of attention to explanations, particularly when there's automated decision making involved. And is that decision making having an impact materially on a person, such as education or giving loans or giving insurances? And the more it is, the more you need to have a human in the loop. And then balancing that with things like bias and discrimination. Those are big issues in this space, and trying to sort of address sort of biases, either new biases or existing biases, and could they lead to discrimination, and trying to sort of get to the heart of those pieces. You certainly don't want anything that you're working on to be inadvertently discriminating against any sort of protected class, or whether it comes to lending or housing, etc. And again, I'm being industry agnostic, not necessarily about the company I work for, but I'm just using general principles. Data security is obviously a concern, and then making sure that just sort of general data hygiene comes into play, and following sort of the life cycle of the data in the ecosystem of the company.
Interesting. I didn't really think about that, the bias in this space. I didn't really think
Yeah.
about that as part of something that's like under your purview a bit too.
Well, I think that a lot of privacy lawyers are thinking, and people that are in the AI space are thinking about bias, and the question of explainability comes into play. How do you explain the algorithms, etc.? So it's definitely a topic of conversation.
Interesting. And what has been your, let's say, most challenging or rewarding legal decision in your current role?
Um, I think, again, I'm going to be general. I'm not going into any specifics, but
Mm-hmm.
just the idea of being really thoughtful and intentional about what is happening externally, and listening, and that entails listening to regulators. What are different regulators saying? What is the common theme between the regulators? What are they saying on a repeated basis? What are external journalists in that space saying, technology journalists, as an example? and what are competitors doing? And so that those sort of insights then are used or have been used, and we've got some good examples of listening very closely and intently, and then bringing that learning inside, and then changing one's priorities in relation to what we're hearing. So if we had at the beginning of the year, okay, a list of priorities or goals that we're going to do this, that, and the other, but constantly using that as a living document or a work in progress to say we always need to be listening in to what external folks are saying, bringing that in to build that defensibility in our programs, as an example.
I can see that would be challenging.
Yes.
So I want to switch back a little bit to talk about AI.
Mm-hmm.
How is your team approaching the legal and ethical challenges that are posed by generative AI?
Yeah, I think of it as three areas of focus. Again, agnostic necessarily to my team, but could apply anywhere. But the first one is how can we use these tools to better the way that our team works? So in the practice of law, in legal operations. So what can we do to make ourselves more productive? So it could be applying the tools to the inbox and saying, okay, pull out all the emails that talk about this subject or that subject. I mean, that's an obvious example. But anything that could help in the day-to-day building those efficiencies is obviously critical. Number two is the substance of the work that we're doing. So how can we use AI to improve a playbook or to provide summaries from a 200-page playbook, as an example, and that could be one idea, but there are many other examples. Obviously, we hear about examples of using AI to help redline a document or give suggestions for, okay, I'm looking for to increase indemnification provisions for the other side, and give me suggestions for how to put language around that piece. That's another example. So using it in the substance of what we do. And then, of course, the third prong, the way I look at it, is the business itself. So corporation, how are the business people using AI? What are the policies around that? What are the restrictions? What are the guardrails? How do we think about AI's note-taking, as an example? Who can use that technology, who cannot? So that is more of at an enterprise level. But I feel that a group of subject matter experts has to start using that technology themselves and create that efficiency, and then that cascades down to understanding how the rest of the business uses the tool as well.
So it sounds to me like you see AI as a benefit, not as a threat.
Absolutely. I mean, it's a tool, and it's a tool that we all have to learn to use. And I think there's a famous meme that talks about the lawyers and other professionals that use AI will survive. Those that don't may well get run over by these tools. So I think it's just another tool that we use in our toolkit, and we just have to monitor to make sure that we're using it to benefit ourselves and the work we do and the companies that we work for.
That makes a lot of sense. I know you don't have obviously a crystal ball, but what legal or regulatory trend or trends do you believe will most impact retail and retail technology over the next several years?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would say that from an AI perspective, there are things like preferences and managing consents for customers. So building out customer preference centers, as an example, and as companies sort of move from being traditional retailers into more of the e-commerce world, there are issues that you somehow have to sort of develop platforms that will address different data residency or different data requirements for customers that are based in different parts of the world. What are the consent mechanisms for a particular jurisdiction? In one country, it could be very different to another. How do you manage a different sort of individual rights and regulations, or the regulations are different in different jurisdictions, but how does that manifest itself into building and addressing individual rights that are pertinent in a particular jurisdiction? But if you're doing that across the board in one platform, you've got to be able to sort of memorialize the requirements and then build out the operational aspects so that you are honoring individual rights in country A, and if you have to do something in country B, that you're building that in that you don't necessarily have to do in another jurisdiction. So it really is a lot of focus on these step-by-step understanding of those requirements. As I said, it's the personalization and balancing data minimization with building up an understanding of who your customer is, and with constantly in your mind of maintaining customer trust and yet having a competitive advantage in the marketplace. So I would say those are the immediate things that come to mind. Although when I think about what's happening in the UK right now, there are a number of retailers, traditional retailers, Marks and Spencers is one example, that have that are embroiled in some sort of cybersecurity related issue with external threat actors, and that's obviously causing them immense impact. So, these are things that folks have to think about, across the board, but lots of lessons to be seen there as well.
Sure, definitely sounds like it. I want to take a minute and kind of go back to your career.
Mm-hmm.
What led you to make moves in your career when you did? Were there any signs like this, it's time for me to move on, or goals you had and that's why you made the moves? Just curious about that.
Yeah, I mean, throughout a career in any profession, so many different factors come into play. It could be you feel that you've outgrown an experience and a role or a company. It could be that the company is reorging, particularly in this current environment, and they perhaps don't need the same level of resources, and you think about pivoting. But I always think, having navigated through different companies, it's amazing the learning that you have when you move from one culture to another, or even work for a big company and work for different P&Ls in one company. That even a company of a large size working with different groups could have different cultures. For example, if that P&L is selling a product, they're focused on having a one point in time relationship with that customer. So they have a very different mindset in terms of how they play and what their journey is with that customer, versus another business that is maintaining that constant touch with that customer. In other words, it's providing some sort of service. It has a very different mindset in terms of how it wants to interact with that customer. And learning the details of each business, even as I say, within one large company, is it's a very, very different experience. And I think it's really fulfilling for one's career to see different cultures, to see different businesses, to see different industries. And you as an individual can bring so much to the table as well, because you've learned maybe from one industry, and you can apply thinking and maybe be a little bit of a disruptor in a new industry. And I think that's welcome in this day and age. People want different thinking and different ideas, and you can certainly do that when you've seen things from a different industry. So it's a mixture of different things, Shawna, that happen in life, as we all know. And I think there's nothing wrong with having um, going across and up and across. We shouldn't always think that we have to be going up at a certain level, because the experiences we gather in all of these journeys help us ultimately in the next step.
I completely agree. I've done, I do legal recruiting now. I've done career counseling, and I always say that a career path is not linear,
Yeah,
necessarily. So it's a good thing to keep in mind that you don't have to follow the straight path, or the path that you started on might just change along the way. So
that's right.
that makes a lot of sense to me, and I'm sure our listeners as well. If you were to go back in time as someone who just finished studying law,
Mhm.
at the start of your career, and could give yourself advice now that you're kind of way past that, what would that advice be?
Well, the first thing is don't panic and don't worry. Life has a way of organizing and taking care of itself. And when you look back, you think, oh my gosh, I didn't realize it at the time, but that was an immense thing. Be very open to somebody tapping your shoulders and suggesting you do one thing when you've been thinking about another. Sometimes people can spot things in us that we can't spot in ourselves. Somebody that's fresh out of law school, networking, in any realm, whether you're actually fresh out of law school or much later in your career, it's the networks that you create and those conversations that you have that you never know might come back in the future and be beneficial either to you or to the other person. And I think not all the jobs, but most of the jobs that I've had in my legal career have been because of conversations versus sort of blanket applications. It's vital, the networking and sort of raising your unique skills, but also listening to what other people are saying. Ask to listen to their career journeys and learn from those, and how do they pivot from one issue or one area to another, and what was their thinking, and that will help guide you. And we all know people are very open to sharing their experiences. The biggest challenge always is when you're reaching out to knock on doors in your network is logistics. People finding time to chat, but most people are very, very willing to have those conversations. So I think that's it. I mean, I think that's what we all know. It's nice to be reminded, though, from time to time that it's just basic principles, really, and learning what you can about if you have a particular industry as a target or a particular company, then learn as much as you can about it. Reach out to people in that company and just try and highlight something that you could bring to the table, either a unique skill set or a particular understanding of a jurisdiction as examples. And it's passion, really. I think it's in this day and age, a lot of things we can be trained for, but it's the attitude and the soft skills and the passion that somebody brings to the table counts for a lot, and we mustn't underestimate that.
That's true. I think oftentimes we do forget about those soft skills that are so crucial. And I
Yeah.
love what you said about listening to others, in-house career journeys. That's why I started this podcast, because I always found it fascinating, and I thought it could be helpful to others looking to make that move in-house. When you were a more junior lawyer, starting off your legal career,
Mhm.
did you always want to be in-house? Was that something that was an aspiration of yours, or did it just kind
I
of
don't think I
happen?
really thought about it. When I was a very junior lawyer, it was more about what is the area of practice. But I think it's a great pathway. I mean, for me personally, I enjoy it so much because I like to sit with the business from the very beginning and understand their strategy and where they're going. And so, um, not to say you can't do that when you're at a law firm, but it's a different alignment when you're in house. And so that for me is very meaningful.
Sure. Do you have any advice for our listeners who are looking to make an in-house move or move within a legal department?
Mhm. Again, reach out, start forming connections, learning so you can better inform yourself. But with that intentional listening as well, in the spirit of informational networking and building your network. And I think that's what it boils down to. It's having those conversations with people, learning about an industry, sending in applications, reaching out to people in that company to sort of support your application and have a human in the loop so that you're not relying on a bot to pick up your application. And using AI to help you in terms of crafting applications and things. And just again, stuff that's all over LinkedIn, the
Right.
advisors
And
that are
utilizing a legal recruiter. I'm
that's
gonna
right,
plug in for that
absolutely.
too.
And Shawna in
Right.
particular, that's right.
But yeah, I think we are, legal recruiters are part of, someone like myself, looking there to be a part of that network. I think that's how we, got connected and why you're here now. We were both
That's
kind of
right.
networking. And so I'm so glad that networking did bring us together and we were able to have this conversation today. I think it was really worthwhile. And I learned a lot. So thank
Great.
you.
No,
Thank
I
you
did
so
too,
much.
Shawna. This is actually very much, it's actually fun. So I've enjoyed it very much. Thank you for giving the opportunity.
Absolutely. Thanks so much.
All right. Take care.
Bye, Sarah.